I'm sorry to say I have very few teachers that I look back on and think that they changed my life or made a difference. But I did have a few. And one that I remember greatly was a professor named Harvey Goldberg, professor of history at the University of Wisconsin. And Harvey Goldberg was extraordinary. When you went to his lecture hall, you had to fight your way in. You had to sit on the floor because there were no seats. Then he would just go up to the stage, stand at the podium, and he would first, people would come up and deliver messages and announcements. He would read like 10 or 15 announcements from radical groups and meetings and rallies that were being held on campus in the 1960s and early 70s when I was a student. And he would read them all out loud. Then when he finished them, he would take off his thick glasses, put them down on the podium, and then he would like look out into the distance as if he saw his lecture notes written in the sky or written on the wall or the ceiling or written on our faces. And then he would just start, and he would not stop for an hour, and he would just speak out loud about the theme or the subject matter of the day. And he would talk with such passion about events in history and experiences, and they were all based in moments in history where we watched people suffering, oppressed, or fighting against oppression, and teaching us the power relations that were involved in producing these moments of human history. And all of us were silent and transfixed for that hour. And then he would suddenly stop at the end of the hour when it was over, and he would put his glasses on and he would leave. And I thought, oh, if only I could be as smart as he is and know as much as he did. Now, I want to say that because I was a very scholastic academic kid, and I thought I was going to climb out of the working class by education. And here I met one of the most brilliant people I've ever heard in my life, and I said, I want to be that smart, and so on. And so I learned a lot from him. And I had one or two other teachers, like an anthropologist named Goldschmidt, who taught me a lot about anthropology and so on. Here's the problem. When I finally grew up and got a Ph.D. and became a teacher, I taught at a third-rate community college for working class students who never did well in school and did not like school and teachers. So I thought that, well, I could just start being the kind of intellectual I was trained to be. And the more I talked in the classroom, the more I lost them, the more that they just ignored me and so on. So I discovered that the brilliance that had meant so much to me could not be reproduced here when there was a problem among the least successful students, who were the vast majority of the American school system, the students in the school system. So I went through a kind of like intellectual crisis. I said, well, what do I do? What do I do? And that's when I started testing other methods that were what we call student-based, student-centered, or drawing on themes from students' lives and posing problems and questions and getting into a discussion and dialogue and asking them what they thought and waiting and saying as little as possible from me so that they couldn't copy my language and prove to me how smart they were by faking that they knew what I knew, and so on and so on. And then a colleague said, you know, there's this guy in Brazil who's been trying what you're trying. And I said, well, who is this person? And he said, well, his name is Paulo Freire, and he wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and you should read it. So I was a young professor then, this is like 50 years ago or more, and I went and got the book and I read it, and it was like sunrise. It was like somebody turned the lights on in the room. Like suddenly the shades were up and I could see, and I realized that there was a framework for understanding what my experience was and what I had to do or how I could proceed, because Paulo Freire was not only a theory of critical pedagogy, but he was also working on a practice among illiterate peasants and workers who were being taught to read and write at a very crucial moment in Brazilian history. So I began to study him and I began to read more. And here's what Paulo Freire says in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He says, education must begin with the solution to the teacher-student contradiction. And that's what I was experiencing among the least successful students, who are the majority of the American school system. That we must solve the teacher-student contradiction. So every time a teacher begins teacher talking in the classroom, the students begin daydreaming or ignoring or turning off. So how did I find a discourse, a way, a practice in the classroom that would create a critical learning process embraced by the students as their own, that they want to participate in? So Paulo Freire says the teacher-student contradiction, by reconciling the poles of the contradiction so that both are simultaneously teachers and students. And so while Harvey Goldberg was this brilliant intellectual who taught me so much, I never said a word during his whole discourse. But I was among the academic stars in the student body who thought that education was everything, and it was going to make my life and enable me to climb up to a middle-class life. So I was willing to soak up and absorb as much as possible from anybody who was smarter than me. But these students were the failures that I was teaching among in this community college, who had been C students in high school and never liked going to school and didn't think that the community college degree was going to take them anywhere, and more or less resented the teacher talk and the authority that was constantly being driven at them. So for the rest of my career, for the next 50 years I taught at this place, I began to develop piece by piece, day by day, stumbling along, a critical pedagogy for the working class students in America that would be suitable for a society like ours, a very advanced, mass media saturated society, the wealthiest society in the history of the world, not an impoverished third world country, and that would invite them to take take responsibility for their learning. But more than that, I didn't simply want to inspire them to take themselves seriously as intellectuals, as people who learn. I wanted them to question the status quo. And that's how I began to write about critical pedagogy here in the North that I was attempting. That the starting point, but where Paulo Freire was working in Brazil and where I was working here, is that we have a status quo that is oppressive, that is brutal, that is cruel, that is unequal, that is undemocratic. And that is the power relations in which we all come of age and in which we all have to grow up and then become adults who work, and in which I was teaching. And it was those very power relations that created the majority of students in America, the majority who are working class, made them push away intellectual life, stop listening to teachers and thinking that they were not worthy of going deeply into matter. So that's my invitation to folks looking at this video, and teachers who are at work in America. Think about the power relations of our conditions. That's the status quo. That's what we live with. What if you are interested? If you feel that we must question the status quo, then this pedagogy is for you. If you want to make that choice, and Paulo Freire always discussed it as a choice, that we make a choice that we're going to put ourselves, our labor, our practice, our teaching practice, in contest with the status quo, with the way things are. Because after all, what do we have here at this moment in America? We have the most economically unequal moment in our history, where the super rich, during this terrible pandemic of the last few years, have gained $1 trillion in wealth, at the same time that the rest of us have struggled with a disease and taking care of our loved ones and not having enough access to health care. And we finally get to health care, it costs so much to get taken care of. We also have a world that is boiling out of control because of global warming. And California is being drowned by one atmospheric river after another that blows across the country. We have droughts and we have fires and so on. And nothing is being done. And this is not a choice we would make at the bottom. This is a choice that we make from the top. I could go on, but we understand that we have questions of gender inequality and of racial inequality and so on, that we can't continue in a society like this. So I made a choice early in life as a child of the 60s to question the status quo, and then to embrace that through Paulo Freire as the foundation for developing the practice of critical pedagogy in my classrooms.